Squish, squash, and squoosh are very fun verbs to say. And then you have the wonderful expression squish squash, which goes back to 1789, to refer to the noise we make when we're walking through the water or through the mud. And I think you can say you're squish squashing through the mud, or perhaps that your shoes are squish squashing because they are making that noise. Now, if we take the verbs squish, squash, and squoosh, for some speakers, those are fairly synonymous, mean relatively the same thing. But some speakers make some interesting distinctions among those verbs.
Okay, well, when I think of squash, I think of a vegetable.
Same. That's literally what I was thinking.
But when you say squish and what was the third one?
Squish.
Then I think of something being squished. So.
Squish, okay.
Like you squash something, it's an action that's, I don't know, you like stepping on something, whereas squish is more of a inadvertent, like, yuckiness. You know, like something can like squish.
Right.
Squash, I would use if I had already squashed something, you know, like I squashed, you know?
I see, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it squish?
Squish.
Squish, I would use if I am currently, like, I'm squishing something. I'm squishing something.
I feel like squash is like a little more like intentional and violent than squish or squish. Those are a little softer, I think, than squash.
Okay.
But they're very similar.
Very similar.
Squash is a food. I guess squish and squish I would use interchangeably.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I think it just depends on, they're like onomatopoeia type kind of things, right?
Right.
It just depends on how juicy it is.
Right?
The squish.
In my mind, squash is like slap somebody, like slap something to squish it.
Yeah.
Squish is like, you know, squish, and
yeah.
squish is like the
Elongated.
the noise kind of.
Yeah.
And you actually brought another one into play, which is smush,
Oh,
which is
smush.
so true too. Yeah.
It is absolutely true that squash is also a vegetable. The word squash, in reference to a vegetable, comes into English from the Native American language Narragansett in the 17th century, and it's a shortening of the original word. The verb squash has a different origin. It comes from Old French. It comes into English in the 16th century, and it means something like repress or subdue or quash. And I think for many of us it still has that meaning, which can be a little more serious, of squashing a rebellion or squashing a conversation. For me, it still has the meaning of press, that kind of sense to it, which is slightly different for me than squish. Squish, which is imitative in origin, for many of us means something like squeeze. So for me, if I squish a bug, that might be something I do with a tissue and I squeeze it, which means that the bug, maybe its insides come out, and that's a little bit gross. The verb squoosh with the double O is much newer. That does not show up until the first half of the 20th century. Most dictionaries that include it, and not all dictionaries include it yet, will say it's a variant of squash. It, of course, is also very much like squish. And I think squoosh is probably the most playful of the three. I certainly don't think we would talk about squooshing a rebellion.